as well. And then kick off the screen share. Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing?
Doing good.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, hi, hi.
Hey.
GM.
Hello.
GM,
Hello.
GM.
Good morning.
Good morning, Emery. Good morning, Stephanie. Wonderful. I think people are still trickling in. I have disenabled the waiting room, so I think people will start to trickle in more and more. I will kick us off for a few minutes here as a introduction to KB4 for Niran for a couple slides, who's our fireside guest for the week from Panvala, which we'll get into in a bit. We'll do a couple of slides of just where we are in Kernel for everyone, just to take a small deep breath as we reflect on what's been a whirlwind 2 weeks. And then we'll hop into the fireside conversation for the week around module 1 on Ethereum's history and state. So Niran, I know that you know KB4 because you've been a part of Kernel in the past, but just so you have a sense, this is a bit of background on the group of people that is in the room with us today. Just in many ways, an incredible group. The titles and descriptions at the top are useful in some contexts, but I really like the bottom portion as well, where you have a better sense of just who these people are as just incredible humans who are now with us building this whole Web3 thing and trying to understand what this story might look like. So we're really, really grateful to each one of them for being with us today and for being with us for this 8 weeks. And it's been a real joy for them to start to get to know each other along the way. The next group of people that we've now introduced is this wonderful list of mentors who we describe as peer mentors, and many of whom are either returning for a second or a third block as a peer mentor. So have a really good sense of what Kernel is as a peer mentor who understands that role. Then you have a second category of people who are newer, either because they were in the Kernel Fellowship prior, or because they've come highly recommended from our current set of peer mentors. So we're really, really excited to introduce you to this group of people. They are here primarily to understand and support the Kernel adventures that are currently happening. And they will be joining us in Slack over the next week or so, primarily, hopefully over the next day or so, as they prepare for their first big introduction to the cohort, which is Kernel office hours, the first of which is tomorrow. So Friday office hours has become a real big part of the rhythm of Kernel. And it's the part that mentors are told, if you can do one thing in the week, come to office hours, meet with some Kernel fellows. And our intention is to line up the mentors who have particular interests with the adventures that are within that domain. So if you see anyone's name here and you're like, I know I want to talk to this person for this reason, reach out to a steward, myself, perhaps, or Alicia are two, Sachin as well, and we'll do our best to make those happen. But office hours is the kind of de facto location. If you come to office hours, you will get to meet some of these mentors, and we will spend time making sure that the right people are in the right rooms. So there's more to come there, but we're at that point in the process where the adventures page helps us a lot. We have the build track that has kicked off this week. We have 85 adventures that are listed, which now the peer mentors are starting to explore to see which of the projects they may be able to make an impact on. And we hope that the process of getting those posted is going well for each of you. That build track continues over the next couple of weeks with what we would describe as an incubation phase, where if you are working on any adventure from scratch, the sense of these next couple of weeks is you can be as early as no prototype, just an idea right now, and the next couple of weeks, perhaps you get a prototype listed on paper and get it to place where we can do some user testing, which prepares us for weeks 4 and 5, where we have Expo Week, which is one of the big events halfway through the program, which we'll share more about, but that happens in week 4. And then towards the end of the program, towards a sharing phase, a growth phase, where we can share whatever it is that's been accomplished over the course of the block. While that is, in theory, how it could work, weeks 2 to 3, then 4 to 5, then 6 to 7, we recognize that you could be at any point in this circle. You could have written a blog post that is already at the growth phase and you're wanting to share your story. We saw Katie put her resource book of Web3 in Kernel Slack in Amplify yesterday. And I know projects are launching every single day. So it's not really our role to dictate what part in this process you are. And our hope is that the program is moldable to that. So just know that we're excited about the build track. We're excited about seeing all the adventures, and that's on our mind to create space for as we move forward in Kernel. But all that being said, it is in many ways secondary to the ways that we can interact with each other and explore Web3. And with that in mind, I'm really excited to pass it to Andy for a second to talk us through where we are in the Kernel syllabus, which is week 1. And hopefully you've gotten to read some of this. Andy will do a brief intro there before we get into conversation with Alicia, Niran, and Andy.
Thank you very much. Do you want to go to the next slide? So, yeah, we begin with Ethereum's history and states, having spent a little bit of time with Bitcoin last week, and the major lessons are meaning and value. I'm really looking forward to what will be a very meaningful and valuable conversation, and I don't want to preempt too much of that. The Yuntos yesterday were so rich, and I highly recommend the Wednesday Yuntos if you want to dig deeper into the specifics of the syllabus. What I will say right now is that one of the key points to think about in the meaning piece is the fact that we make meaning. And in particular, we make meaning between ourselves. We make meaning together in relationship. As Leo Tolstoy and Alexander McCandless found out, happiness is only real when it's shared. Meaning only means when it is in the context of another person. And this extends into the wider argument made in that particular post, which is that we now have these widely dispersed cryptographic tools that can help us secure mathematical consensus about the kinds of meaning which we are making together. And while it's not necessarily appropriate to put into natural language what the meaning of Ethereum is, because it's far easier to find it on a block explorer, it is kind of beautiful to think about this 8-sided tetrahedral logo and the resonance and implication that it has, both in terms of its descent from Plato's Timaeus and this notion of the 5 elements, the 4 terrestrial earthly ones, and the ether as that which, the air of another realm, the quintessence, that which permeates these meaningful spaces between, when we are able to integrate the interactions between all 4 earthly elements. And the reason that I say this is not just to sound airy-fairy, but because what is the meaning ultimately of these kinds of tools? It's really about coordination, right? We have now the sorts of networks that allow us to coordinate at the scales necessary to take on the problems of our age. The major problem being climate change, right? And the meaning of these networks is in some way very deeply related, not just to the Greek word ether, but to the Greek word oikos, which is the roots of the word economy and ecology. And it means home, right? Economics is the management of the home. And the meaning of these coordination tools, it's not just, it's one thing to say, yes, we can coordinate at scales never before possible because we have the new and necessary financial primitives required to actually collaborate in a meaningfully horizontal and peer-to-peer fashion. But why? Why do we do that? What is the story at the heart of these things, which is worth collaborating at the scale? And it's to come home. It's to care for our home, both internally and externally, because that's what Kernel is all about. This internal state reflects the world that I experience, just as the world that I experience impacts upon my internal state. Constant dialogue back and forth. And that bleeds into the post about value, right? Which is simply that value is ultimately, it boils down to trust in clearly shared truths. And that's it is the efficiency of the language that you employ to tell your fiction, not in a pejorative sense, but fiction is that which reveals the truth. And it is the efficiency of the language that you employ to tell your fiction, which allows the kinds of trust required for global collaboration games to be played. That then is sort of expanded upon as we look through some of the history of Ethereum and also, sort of capitalism and computer networks with Vinay and various other pieces, which you can explore in your own time. I think it's best really to move kind of immediately into conversation with our dear friend Niran, who's a great inspiration for many of the ideas that you will see in Kernel, and has played a really big and beautiful and quiet role in the culture of these nascent communities that underpin so much of our own hope and thinking. And Niran, as Vivek mentioned, is one of the people behind Panvala, and Panvala is a community treasury. So I think that perhaps we can start there, because Niran, there are many people in Kernel that have built sort of treasury tools for DAOs. But I wonder if perhaps we can start with just looking at like what is different between a treasury tool for a DAO and this notion of a community treasury, an endowment fund for the ecosystem. What led you there, and what are the key differences that inspired your particular approach?
Awesome. So thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for being here. The best way to dive into like what that distinction is to, I guess, tell you a little bit about my story about like how I got here. So like my story in the Ethereum world starts, I guess, in early 2015. This was before Ethereum had launched on the mainnet. That would happen later in July of 2015, I believe. But at that point, I heard about Ethereum. I actually thought it was kind of a scam coin. Like I got Bitcoin and I understood it, like they're doing this digital gold thing. And I heard about Ethereum and it's like, these guys think they can make a more valuable currency by putting a programming language in their money. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's probably a scam, not gonna touch that. But then I heard about this project called Augur, which is a prediction market platform. And I was excited about prediction markets at the time because basically they allow you to produce reliable probability estimates for future events. The same way we have weather forecasts, you basically have forecasts for any kind of future event you want to create a market for. So I was excited about prediction markets. I'm like, okay, I'm going to contribute to this project. That project happened to be using Ethereum. So it was really contributing to Augur, writing code to make that system work, that made it clearer to me what Ethereum really was, what it did. It wasn't just putting a programming language in your money, which is a very good idea. I highly recommend it. But what it means is that you can write down the rules for any interaction between individuals or groups of people, like it's the rules to a board game. But instead of needing a game master to enforce the rules of your game, the system of interactions that you built up, instead you publish that set of rules to this network of thousands of computers, and that network of computers will be the game master for you. So instead of needing to depend on any single person, any single entity to make the good stuff that you like doing with other people happen, you can do it on your own without depending on anybody forever. So if you think that there are better ways to cooperate, better ways to interact, that we just need to write down the rules for and enforce so we can start doing it together, then you can actually just publish your experiment to the Ethereum blockchain today. You can do it from your bedroom. You can do it in your underwear. As long as it's a good idea, you can get it out to people, convince them to use it. If they enjoy doing it, they don't need to depend on anybody to keep doing that on and on and on forever. So that's when the light bulb went off in my head. I quit my job. I tried to find a place that was hiring people to work in Ethereum full time, and stumbled upon Consensus and started working there. And really, the first thing that I was trying to figure out is like, okay, if we're going to build tools on this platform, like what can you do that's actually sustainable? What sustainable business models, or sustainable models in general, are there for decentralized systems? So I sat down, opened up a document, started writing down things. It's like, hey, you could create a marketplace, a decentralized marketplace, and instead of just like being the single entity on there, you could just be a service provider. Like you could be, instead of being Uber and being everything, you could be like the person who says you're trusted and just like verify people and charge for that service on this decentralized system. There are a couple other things I wrote down. And then the last thing on this list is like, well, if you have this toolkit for creating rules of engagement, rules of cooperation, just find ways to get people to cooperate to fund public goods, and then build all the decentralized systems we want as public goods using that mechanism. But it's like, that's far-fetched. That's outlandish. Like, how are you going to do that? That seems really hard to do. But that's the idea I couldn't get out of my head the whole time. It's like, if you could create some sort of decentralized nonprofit, decentralized community funding system, like that, to me seemed like the more or less the purpose of Ethereum. There's no baked in purpose to Ethereum. The purpose is whatever you find in it, and I hope you find your own purpose in it. But to me, it's like, okay, that seems like the biggest thing you can do with it. So I came up with these different prototypes for a version of decentralized nonprofits. The first one launched at like DevCon 2 in Shanghai. Did another one that actually the legal department would not let me launch because DAOs and tokens were very much a gray area at the time. And then Panvala is actually the third in the series, the one that I'm like, okay, this is what I think it's all really for. So what it is at the end of the day is a network of communities who cooperate and earn perks from our shared endowment, that treasury that we're talking about. And what makes it different from a lot of the treasuries out there is that it isn't based on trying to hold as much ether as possible necessarily. And it's not even something that can hold other kinds of tokens. It's really just trying to manage a flow of value for communities. In fact, it's not a system where you can just say, hey, we have all these tokens in the treasury, let's spend all of them, or let's spend a big chunk of them, because it's based on basically Bitcoin's model of inflation, where in Bitcoin, every 10 minutes, more Bitcoins are being created to reward the miners that operate the network up to that maximum of 21 million tokens. And Panvala, it's that same sort of thing, where each quarter, a portion of the inflation is released up to that maximum amount of 100 million tokens. And the reason it's done this way is because at the end of the day, we're trying to build up a flow of value for communities. It's not about the stock of what's in a particular smart contract. It's not about trying to accumulate as much as possible there and directing it wherever. It's about trying to organize a flow of value back into it. And that's another big difference from the Bitcoin model in particular and other treasuries that are out there. The tokens can actually go back into the token supply to kind of rewind that inflation and let more come out over time. So it's really organized. It's designed to organize a flow of value perpetually for the communities who share this system. So it's kind of a different design for a treasury. I think it's good, but I'm biased. So it's like, it's not that saying that this is a better way to do a DAO treasury. It's just a different way for a different purpose. We're trying to direct value to communities forever.
I wonder, Niran, if we could if you could tell us the story about the myth of Panvala just before we get kind of back into the present day, and just maybe your inspiration and what deeply touched you about that story.
I would love to. So for some context, I'll go through what the myth of Pan Bala is. So roughly, it's a story about this village that's set up along a river at the base of a mountain. And really all the activity in that village is really powered by that river. Like they use the water in that river to make sure their crops can grow. They use it to drink when they're thirsty. When they want to have a good time and just have some fun, they splash the water on each other, get each other wet. Like the water is the lifeblood of that village. But then one day the sun stops shining so bright, and the water stops evaporating the way it needs to get back to the top of that mountain and flow back into that river and keep flowing and sustaining that community. So the community is all in disarray. Things aren't going the way they're supposed to. People are trying to figure out a solution to this problem. They're at the top of the mountain trying to figure out how they're going to solve the problem. And you really can't find a solution, but like at the end of the day, somebody just starts to have fun instead. So they start splashing some water on each other. But that water, when it hits the ground, starts to freeze again, starts to be that, source of what they needed to flow down to the mountain instead, which gives them a spark. Instead of needing the light to evaporate that water and complete that cycle, they could be the light. They could complete that cycle and keep things going by just taking the water back up to the mountain so it can continue to complete that cycle and make things work. So it's kind of like, a water cycle allegory. The whole idea is that with Panvala, we're trying to build this perpetual cycle of value that's flowing through Panvala. And that's really it's not just about maximizing what's in the treasury. It's not about building some sort of protocol and being like, oh, okay, this protocol charges fees that now sustain things or whatever. Like, it's really about trying to organize ourselves and organize our communities in a way that we can continually fund what we want to do together by kicking it off with a flow that kind of starts from the tokens that we've initialized in that token supply. But together, as we benefit from the system, finding ways to close that loop and keep it going forever. If you want to take a look at the Panvala handbook, that Myth of Pan Bala is in there. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, also let me know. Always interested in what you think.
It's really awesome. I read that and I was surprised because I had in my mind Pan, the sort of flute playing god of play, which had always reminded me also in Norse mythology, there's Elua, who is the god of play there. And it's so funny, the stories that are told about him, because there's all of these kind of like evil demigods and other various kind of video game characters who are constantly trying to, stick it to Elua. Like, this guy is an asshole. He's always so happy. He's just messing around, having the best time. He doesn't seem to suffer like the rest of us. Let's show him we're going to really get it in for him this time. And of course, they come up with these grand schemes and huge plots and machinations. And Elua never falls for any of them because he's not playing the same game. He's not playing within the rules, he's playing with the rules. It sort of is an interesting analogy for me, because one of the outcomes of this focus on the flow of value back into a group of collaborating communities is that we end up talking about something called total value allocated in the Panvala system, as opposed to total value locked. And it's this value allocated, it seems to have something to do with cooperation and play and getting together. I wonder if you can explore that a little bit for us.
Absolutely. So if the name of the game, which it is for me, is finding new and better ways to cooperate, to me, the best way to measure like how these new systems are doing is seeing how much cooperation is happening. And that cooperation can be denominated by how much a system is allocating in terms of economic value. Where we can get on that path Like if we're trying to build better systems of cooperation than currently exists, well, there's a lot of value allocated by corporations. There's a lot of value allocated by governments. Even on a smaller scale, you can think of the value allocated by like something like a university that has an endowment that they're using to fund things. Like those are kind of the milestones on the track there. It's like if you're building systems of cooperation, there's a lot of existing systems of cooperation. You just see what their budgets are. And it's like, well, where are we on that scale of budgets? And that's kind of the milestones on the path that we're trying to go down to see how big we can grow this, how many communities we can get to work together, how much resources we can drive to go there. Because I think the cap, the possibilities are in fact very large if we can if the missing pieces of what we think that is going wrong in our current society, if it's not just human nature, which I don't think it is, if there's actually something fixable, then the deadweight loss in our current economy is just so large. And what deadweight loss is, it's like this economic term that's about like the inefficiencies in a society due to policies or just the way people are organized. Like there's so many areas of policy making where they're like, oh, we're actually causing problems with the rules of the system that we've put there. And if we just took that rule out, everybody would be better off. So sometimes they do that and everybody gets better off. Like the one example that they use of this is like the early versions of things like rent control. Not that rent control is like universally bad or anything. I don't want to get into anything like that. But like when they first tried it, it was just bad. They didn't do it right. So like cities crumbled. People weren't building housing because they're like, oh, this policy has this deadweight loss where everybody is actually worse off. So that's kind of an example of what deadweight loss is. And I think the deadweight loss in our current society from the way we've organized things is so unspeakably large, because like if you see how efficient we are at providing things that one person benefits from, and see how bad we are once 2 people start to benefit from it, or 10 people, then it should be a little clear. Like look at the supercomputers we have in our pockets. They're excellent. They're excellent because one person benefits from each one. So it's very easy to say, hey, this person is a person who should pay for it. And if I can make something that this person wants, I'm going to make a lot of money. So Apple, Google, Samsung, all these companies, they do their best work and they make these very shiny objects that we all like, and they advance at a rapid pace. Like that's because one person benefits. But imagine if 10 people benefited from a single smartphone, then like, how would you decide who's going to pay for it? How are you going to get that funded in the first place? What if 1 million people benefited from it? Then like, we're just going to, I guess we're going to tax people. Like that's our default solution to these problems. But we know that like markets tend to be fairly good, not perfect, at like identifying what people want and what satisfies those wants without the need for any central plan when it comes to like things that we have to do together because we haven't figured out a solution to make things more market-like. Then we're just not perfect at saying, hey, we should spend money on this, we should spend money on that. And as a result, sometimes we have crumbling roads, sometimes we have environments that decay. Like we're just not good at doing things in that way. So that to me is the massive deadweight loss. Like the work that we have ahead of us isn't really done until you look outside your window and everything is just like sparkling and glistening. The roads are beautiful, like the air is clean, the wildlife is thriving. Like everything should feel like it's advancing at the rate that the smartphones in your pocket advance at. And until it feels like that, we're doing something wrong. To me, it's obvious that we're doing something wrong and that we can do better.
Just thinking about this idea of deadweight loss and crypto in particular, and how it's very easy to see DeFi and the evolution from kind of traditional finance, and where that has come from. I'm just wondering in terms of how you think about communities, and it almost feels like there is a much larger gap there in terms of time and kind of really what you're doing with Panvala and kind of the communities that you're thinking about, and how you're kind of enabling and empowering communities to create economies and create that flow in ways that they haven't. So how do you think about communities going all the way back and then bridging that gap to where crypto is now?
Yeah, so for me, like when you look across the crypto world, like a lot of what's happening is getting communities engaged with some sort of technology or sometimes just some asset. But like there's interesting community life happening in almost every crypto project or ecosystem that's out there. And that's just kind of a fascinating thing to behold, because that was never really true just for like open source projects in general. Like you would have an ecosystem of contributors and people who use it, but like you wouldn't have discords full of people just trying to chat about some open source project. Like it wasn't at the scale that what's happening in crypto is. So it's so clear to so many people that what's going on in crypto is very much tied to community life. But for me, it's really about what I think crypto is for. What I think crypto is for is kind of providing economic tools for things that were not there before. So to me, if you think that crypto is for creating new kinds of corporations or better kinds of corporations, you're probably right. But to me, that's not where the biggest opportunity is, because corporations already have powerful economic tools. They have equity, among other things, and they use that to kind of supercharge their growth and get things done. So that's really powerful there that they already have. If you think it's about creating better forms of political life, I mean, you're probably right. But again, I think political life already has powerful economic tools, things like national currencies and central banks that really power what they're doing together. But the area of our society that doesn't have powerful economic tools is community life. When we want to do the things we like with the people we like, we just kind of pool our resources together to get things done. And it can work. It's not that bad, but it doesn't have nearly the power that something like equity has or something that a central bank has. So as a result, I think community life really gets crowded out by those other things. You've probably seen political life consume almost everything in our society. Corporate life consumes almost everything in our society. And then community life is just this sideshow. It's not the main event. And that to me is really an economic problem. If you had the same kinds of powerful economic tools for community life that political life and corporate life had, I think that the space that community life takes up in our society would be much bigger. We wouldn't do everything about politics. We wouldn't do everything about corporations and profit seeking. We would do more things with the people we like doing the things we like if resources could be driven in that direction. And that's really the promise of what this technology is. So the big question is about where those resources come from. Like you can create a token and start giving it out to communities, and that's like a pretty good start. But like where does the value come from in the long run to actually be able to direct to communities? And for me, a lot of the thinking behind that comes from the thinking of a guy named Henry George. So Henry George was this economist who's actually very popular and somehow like isn't really part of like the common economic curriculum, but he was like a best-selling like writer, even for like pop economic, like it was normal people were reading it. It wasn't just economists, but he wrote a very popular book, very popular bestseller called Progress and Poverty, I believe. But basically his idea, his thinking was that, hey, you know, this land that was all here before any of us got here, the people who benefit from owning the land don't have to do any work to get those benefits. They just own the thing, and then the rest of us pay them to access Earth. Something seems wrong about that. And his idea wasn't that like, oh, we should just get rid of the idea of owning Earth. Like other people had that idea, and I think it went relatively poorly. I think the idea of owning pieces of Earth is fine, But his idea was more about what we should do with the value that's captured merely from owning a piece of earth. His idea was like the value of the land should go to the communities where that land is to be able to allocate the way they want. So his policy suggestion was really that we should tax land. Like, don't tax people's buildings, don't tax the structures that they build on top of it. That's work. Like, you're making money for doing work, like a building is work. But land is not work. Like, you probably shouldn't get paid just for owning a piece of land because you're not doing anything, and that just seems kind of suboptimal. So really, like that was his policy suggestion: tax the land. Like, all the value of the land should go to communities, and they should distribute it there. So this was tried in a couple places, but as you can imagine, it's not the most politically popular suggestion that the people who currently own land should just have to pay all the value of that to the government. So like it faded away mostly. There's a couple of places that still try to do a version of it. But in America in particular, not really a popular thing. It exists in other places, but I don't have a list. It's a great Wikipedia rabbit hole to go down, and I highly suggest it. But the general concept that the value of scarce things should go to the communities around that scarce thing is really the core thinking behind most of what people are talking about in crypto. They're saying, hey, these things should be community owned. The value of these things should go to the communities, to the users. They're speaking Henry George's language just about different things. They're not talking about land. They're talking about our digital spaces, the value of those spaces that should go back to people. And I think it's a very popular idea. It's really just a question of how we do it. When it comes to things that are purely digital, like protocol type things, there have been people who are launching these protocols either to eliminate the middleman, who's that person collecting the rent altogether. And that's great. If you can do that, if you can create a protocol that just works and there's no middleman at all, great, fantastic. We've solved the problem. We can just use this thing that doesn't collect any rent from us. But some systems are fundamentally congestible. Like, they get crowded and they just can't scale to be able to handle everybody all the time. So then charging a fee for access to it makes sense, because we have to have some way of allocating that resource to people. It's just that the value of that fee, the question is where the value of that fee goes. Most people who are creating congestible systems and charging a fee, that value goes to the token holders. So if you're familiar with Ethereum and the EIP 1559, where some of the transaction fees now get burned as a congestion fee, that is both great, like it's a perfect, like if it's a necessary fee in the first place, like it makes sense to charge it. It makes sense to like, and then just directing it to the token holders instead of the miners isn't that big of, that's probably a benefit. But there's also potential to, you know, direct that value back to the community that's around the system in the first place. And that's why I'm excited about what Optimism has been proposing. So Optimism is a layer 2 project that's trying to scale Ethereum. And they've been trying to find ways where they know they need to charge a fee for this congestible resource to make sure that it doesn't get overly congested. They set the price at wherever it needs to be to make sure that it's not too congested. And they're just saying, hey, let's make sure that a lot of those fees go to public goods that this community needs. And that's really very core to that Henry George style thinking. It's like, hey, we're charging some sort of rent, some sort of fee. Let's direct it back to the community is a great way to think about things. But I think what crypto can do can go so far beyond these technical protocols, these financial protocols. I think they can actually do a lot of what Henry George had in mind. I think instead of just being about redirecting the value of like new digital systems we create, I think anytime there is somebody that is more or less getting paid for nothing, getting paid for either the market power that they have to be able to exclude competitors, or getting paid because they like have found some way to corner something that is just naturally scarce, I think the value should go to communities. But if it's not something that you can just create a protocol for, if it's something like our attention, where all the value of our attention goes to, you know, advertising companies who are selling our attention to the highest bidder, I think that value should probably go to us and our communities, but capturing that isn't necessarily something you can do with a protocol. Like you can't write a protocol that just says, oh, this value is going to go somewhere else instead. So that's where I think community life is so important. I think community life should be the beneficiary of when we decide to redirect some sort of rent that's being captured by a rentier, some person who's getting money for nothing, and we're redirecting it. I think we should redirect it to the communities that are producing that value in the first place. So if we found some sort of magical way to say, hey, every ad on our screen, that value is no longer going to go to some company that's capturing all the value. It's going to go to our communities. Well, you can't just say that. You have to organize human beings to make that happen. So that to me is why focusing on community life is so important, and not just even crypto communities. Like crypto communities are very important, and they're going to be on the leading edge. If this world in my head is actually the path that we're going down, then the crypto heavy communities are going to be on the leading edge of whatever change ends up happening. But it can't just be crypto communities. It has to be communities in the real world. It has to be your meetup groups about all sorts of topics. Even like photographers meeting up, that's a community. They deserve to capture the value they create. I think that's important there. Your neighborhood groups, your recreational sports teams, your all sorts of community groups, clubs, classes, like those are the people who are the beneficiaries of what I think the change in our economy that's happening is. So if they're the beneficiaries, we have to organize them kind of upfront. We can't say like, oh, we're like, we demand that all this value just go to them somehow. If you could pass a law to make that happen, sure, it would be easy. But also passing laws is hard. But I'm saying if you're trying to do this on a voluntary basis, it's really just about organizing people, bringing them together and showing them that this value can go to you instead. Instead of value going to Google and Facebook, it can go to fund your community. Instead of value going to maybe one day, instead of like your community paying rent for the land that they gather on to somebody who happens to own the land, like maybe just every community gets their share of, you know, the space that's out there because it belongs to all of us in the first place. Like nobody created land. Why are communities paying for the land that they access? Most of the first thing that most civic organizations do when they have enough resources to do it is to stop paying rent. They buy land, they build their own buildings. Like some of the oldest buildings in the city that I live in, Austin, Texas, they have the names of civic organizations that were once popular but have long since faded away. There's the Scottish Rite Theater, and the Scottish Rite is kind of a, I think a Mason sort of fraternal organization, no longer super popular. That building still stands because they stopped paying rent. There's the Elks Lodge, same sort of thing, same sort of fraternal organization. Like churches do the same thing. Like your community just kind of ends up wanting to stop paying rent because it doesn't make any sense. And I think that logic should kind of apply to our whole economy. Communities should stop paying rent. Instead, for the things that are naturally scarce, things like land, attention, the things that we have to find a way to allocate, there still needs to be some payment made. It's just that payment should go into the budget of the communities that those people are a part of in the first place. So that to me is what can happen. It's one possible world that this technology opens up. But to do it, it's not just about building a fancy protocol and being the best shadowy supercoder that's possibly out there. It's not just about finding some sort of economic golden goose that can lay the egg. It's really about bringing people together and doing that with as much energy, with as much effort as we possibly can, to be able to show people what's possible, organize the beneficiaries of this possible world, and direct value to community life instead.
It's incredible. I want to say the fewest possible words to get you just to keep speaking forever, if that's okay. One of the things which interests me in this regard of, you've said so many beautiful things, but there is this notion of enclosure as that which really hampers use of the commons and vibrant community life. And yet, in order to be a community, there has to be some boundary. And this is something that people have been struggling with. How do we have healthy and vibrant communities that are open and accessible and welcoming and constructive, creative, collaborative, while keeping them healthy and intimate, and yet not falling into the trap of enclosure and all of the stuff which comes with that?
So enclosure to me is kind of a fascinating pattern to think through, like a fascinating historical moment to try to apply to what's going on in crypto right now. So for people who aren't aware of what the enclosure movement was, I'm going to give the roughest possible version that I can. But basically, in like feudal times, before capitalism, before like just owning everything was the name of the game, before it was like, hey, the king, the monarch says, you own this piece of land. It's not really tradable. You can't really sell it. It's just like the king says, this is yours. But there were rules, conventions about like how you use what you've been given or what is yours. And there was common space for the basically the vassals, whatever you want to call it. There was space that everybody was kind of entitled to on that land. But once you started to, there was a point where people figured out that if you could enclose the common land, it was creating a whole bunch more income for people than having people work on your land had for them before. So like people started doing these experiments where they would enclose land, raise sheep, I believe, on the land, and then just make a whole bunch of money. So then they petitioned their governments. They're like, hey, these old rules about how we use the land and have this common space for people, what if we got rid of that common space thing and just put up fences everywhere and said, hey, you own this piece of land. You can do whatever productive thing you want to do on this piece of land and pay me for that. This new relation, this new economic and social relation that wasn't there before, but happened to make a whole bunch of money for people. So all the common space, as this swept to Europe, started to get enclosed. Different governments passed different enclosure acts, or they're like, hey, you can do this enclosure thing now. It seems like a good idea. It makes a lot of money for everybody. Go do this thing. So all this common space that was once there started to disappear. And now we live in the world that we currently live in, where like common space is a relatively rare thing. There are parks and things, but just it's just not the same order that was there before. So just thinking about what made people this enclosure movement did not happen on its own. These acts did not happen on their own. It's all these self-motivated people who see this possibility to drive more resources to themselves are the gears in that machine, and slowly the knowledge of this possibility spreads, and the willingness to like spend their time trying to change policies spreads, and that's how it ends up sweeping. So this context is important because in crypto, I think the opposite thing is happening. Some similar things, but some opposites. So the similar things you can think of as people trying to enclose new digital spaces and charge a fee or direct value to their token. So there is, in some sense, a new enclosure movement happening in crypto, where people are trying to find out what are the possible protocols we can build? What are the possible decentralized things that that can be built? Let's create a token and drive value to our token this way. And in a lot of senses, that's very similar to the enclosure movement. But I think there's something separate that's also happening in crypto, something that's possible, which is enclosure in reverse, which is really finding ways to kind of identify all the value that's been bottled up, that's been enclosed, and find ways to direct that back to communities. And if you could find some sort of something that matches that same pattern, where it's really self-motivated people who see that they can direct more value to something that they enjoy, something that they like, then you kind of get a self-organizing movement to undo what's been done before. And to me, tokens are the missing piece that make this enclosure in reverse possible. Because instead of purely, if you were trying to say, hey, let's all these people who are currently benefiting from owning these scarce things, let's put it over there instead. There's no one who's self-motivated to do that. Like you can, if you believe that that's the way the world should be ordered, you can put in a lot of work to make that happen. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to feed your family and things like that. So what if you can create another form of property that doesn't give you the same rights that the existing forms of property do? Maybe you don't get to collect rent forever, but it gives you some sort of property right in this new system that you're building. Then people can, on their own, in a self-motivated way, say, I'm going to direct value to community life and also get rewarded for that. And if that's actually possible, that to me is what's unlocked by blockchain technology, this ability to organize people in new ways to where it's not just the default property system that's possible, which is good. Like the default property system is very like it's created a lot of prosperity for a lot of people. I'm not against it in any way, but if you have all these experiments running at the same time, I think people are going to find something better, and I think what it's going to produce is something like Enclosure in reverse. I don't think it's optimal to have all the value of scarce things directed to just a few people. I think it's probably optimal to have it directed to lots of people, the people who it is their natural inheritance to have access to those scarce things. They should probably get the value for it from it. And if that is in some way possible, then I think somebody is going to come up with an experiment that leads us in that direction, that instead of producing this new sort of crypto enclosure movement where we're trying to find ways to collect fees and drive it into our token, there's kind of a crypto exposure movement, something that's enclosure in reverse and that directs value to communities instead. I think that is a real possibility, and I think it could make everybody better off. It could create like one of the biggest problems that I think is currently happening is that people feel like they have less and less agency as our society progresses. People like it gets kind of rigid, where like our systems get so big, so opaque, that it's like, well, who's actually controlling this? Who's making this happen? Like when you have a desire that isn't fulfilled in our society, like that feels bad. It feels constraining. It feels not right, and sometimes it makes people want to tear the whole thing down. And I don't think we should do any of that. I think we should find ways to restore agency to people by directing value to community life. Community life is particularly important because you choose your own community. Like you don't always choose your own government. You don't even always you choose the companies that you work for, but you're really just trying to find the thing that gives you the most rewards, and not purely in money, but like in working conditions, etc. But like your community, you're choosing the people you like to spend time with. You're choosing the mission that you want to do together. If your community is allocating resources in a way that you don't like, you choose a different community. You don't have to win an election. You don't have to defeat your opponents. You just go somewhere else, access your share of our common inheritance, and direct it in the direction that you want it to go to. Like restoring agency for people is so important. And to me, that's like when I talk about that deadweight loss that can be kind of removed, where we can all kind of be more prosperous. That to me is what it looks like. It looks like your vision for what we should be doing in our society being more possible, not necessarily that everybody is forced to do it, because again, it's community life. Your community gets to do what you want to move forward towards your vision. So you never end up in that situation where it's like, I think the world should be more this way, but there is no avenue for me to achieve that. Like that's what we can eliminate. That's what we can make go away entirely. Like whatever you can do with your share of our common inheritance, you can just go do. And that to me is so much of a better world. It's not a utopia. Like not everybody's ideas are actually even possible, but there's no one that you get rid of that lack of agency. There's no more excuse that it's like, oh, it's other people just stopping me from doing the things that I want. My opponents are just so bad that I can't get the world to be my way. No, it's like, hey, you tried your idea with your share of the resources and it wasn't that attractive to enough people to be able to make it happen. Like that sort of agency, I think will make everybody happier. will actually progress us, because some people's ideas are good. A lot of people's ideas are bad. They're going to try them and they're going to fail. But some people's ideas are good and they're going to work, and other people are going to copy them. And that, to me, is the path to like a better world. There's no utopia at the end of the rainbow, but there is more agency for more people. And that, to me, is really special.
We should just sit in silence for a minute just to absorb everything. Truly, I don't even have any more questions. I don't know what's it's beautiful. Vivek, maybe there are some from the chats that we can just studying. No, thank you.
Yeah.
I wonder if just before we get into the chat, Niran, you could run us through how you're seeing like an example of a community that you're really happy to see kind of flourish, and then how they're using Panvala, and how you envision that kind of going forward.
So the community that's using Panvala in the most interesting way right now is the DApp node community. So what they've been doing with their share of Panvala's endowment is basically rewarding community contributors to whatever their community needs done. Again, for some context, DApp node helps create tools for each individual to be able to host, to be able to run nodes in these decentralized systems so they can be truly decentralized. So it's an open source project, and there's a lot of community members that steer what goes on there. So they use their share of the endowment to reward people, and then they try to close the loop, because each quarter they're still pushing these donation rounds where people, where they're trying to get different community members to donate. So imagine you are a community member who actively contributes. If you actively contribute, then you're getting some of the resources from Panvala that you then can use to fulfill your community obligations. Like if it's a norm in your community to contribute on a regular basis, and you've contributed by doing work, then now you have this token of appreciation that you donate back into the system to complete the loop. Imagine you're a community member who does not contribute. Well, then you go off on your own, you buy some of the token off the open market, and then you contribute in that way. So really creating a closed loop community economy is really what they're all about. And seeing that experiment work and thrive has been really fascinating, but that's probably the most interesting way. The other way that's also like worth noting is kind of the straightforward, non-complicated way of using it, which is using it to enhance community life. So there are communities within Panvala that use their share of the endowment to really just fund their events, to make sure that there's food and drink available for when people are coming together, making sure that the event venue that people need to come together in is paid for, making sure that there's like a photographer to be able to like record what's going on there so you can make memories together. Like the straightforward uses of Panvala are also very exciting, because again, like core to community life is just people coming together to have a good time on a regular basis. And it doesn't really need to be fancy. You don't have to create a fancy community economy, things like that. You can just say, hey, like we have great events and we have a great time hanging out with each other, because that's what we're all about.
I'm having my best time hanging out with you. When can we do this?
As often as you want.
I mean, it's just Panvala Firesides forever.
I just go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Paul's question about Dungeons and Dragons. But do you want to go ahead?
We can. I think we should hop into Q&A. Ideas per minute here is way too high. Niran, I've sent you some funny Telegram screenshots of the chat, just like everyone very excited about what's going on. I'll be very quick, but I said this in chat, and it's true. It's not even like Vitalik has had a really big impact on me, and so has Niran, in very, very different ways. And I came across both of their work around the same time in 2018. And I remember one of these fun events that that was happening. Both of us were at Consensus at the time. And we were so lucky to be able to go to Portugal for what at the time was the Consensus retreat. And I remember somebody getting on stage and saying a simple phrase that I think many people have probably heard in crypto, change the incentives, change the outcome. And it completely stuck with me. This was Niran at the time, and it in itself is something that you hear a lot, but I hope over the last hour you've gotten a sense of what that exploration has done in Niran's own life, the way that he's approached it, and how lucky I think we all are that he's sharing it with us. So thank you for being here. That's really all I have to say.
Thanks for having me. That line that I stole, change the incentives, change the world. Like, I didn't know that I was stealing it at the time, but then like I was like, where did I get that from? And it turned out that the person who incepted that in my brain was Vitalik himself. So if you Google change the incentives, change the world and Vitalik, you'll see an article that he wrote. I'm like, oh yeah, I did read that article. That's what did it. But it's the perfect line. Like, that's really the opportunity that's out here. Like, you can change the incentives to be something that works out to be a more pro-social system for whatever you think more pro-social looks like. And if those incentives work, if people are willing to actually reward the people who do the actions that you're trying to incentivize, they will close that loop. You can actually design a world that works in the way that you want and test it out to see if it works. So that is really the project that's in front of us, and also kind of the obligation that's in front of us. Like, it's a responsibility too. Like, if the technology is as powerful as the things that I've been saying kind of imply that it is, the outcomes are not necessarily good. You can also make mistakes that lead to bad outcomes too. So that's also a thing that's out, just to put an asterisk on the utopian thinking that I've been putting out there. Like, that is not guaranteed. Like, we have to be stewards. We have to steer this in a direction that's actually positive. We have to be on the lookout for things that might seem negative, to keep things on the right track, because, you know, history is littered with people who thought that they were making the world a better place, and, you know, massive atrocities happened. So just make sure that you're not doing any massive atrocities along the way, and you'll probably be good. But on a serious note, like, it takes people steering this stuff. It's not like a emergent outcome that everything ends up good. It takes good people. So be the good people.
There is a wonderful Rumi quote, which says, "Speak a new language, and the world will be a new world." The sense that the role of the visionary, the artist, the mystic, that particular archetypal figure in collective consciousness is not to change the world, it's to change the eyes that see. And one of the ways in which we do this is by speaking from the heart clearly about our purpose for being here, which I think you've done really, really well. You know, you haven't presented a utopian vision, so there's no utopia at the end of the rainbow. There's more agency, which is delightful. And I wonder, you know, like, we spend a lot of time speaking about meaning, about intention, about purpose. And one of the things which has really touched me about how you have presented your own journey in the course of this discussion is that everybody's purpose is open to them, and my purpose need not be yours. But just in the context of your own life, how have you come to such clarity of purpose? You know, what are the sort of high watermarks or landmarks along the way which have brought you to this particular world inside your head? Not just, you know, working at Orga and the crypto stuff, but perhaps wider.
So there's a part of me that's always been like very attuned to like fairness, right? And like a lot of people who are attuned to fairness look at our society and see how much inequality there is, and they're like, it seems pretty unfair. So that's a part of me that's out there. But there's also a part of me that is very practical, and I think a lot of it comes from like just a background in software engineering and seeing the emergent outcomes of so many systems that I've tried to build. Like, just the experience of writing some code and seeing like some sort of infinite loop happen, and being like, oh, like my intention did not have the outcome that I expected, like kind of dissuades you from like thinking that intentions are good enough for good outcomes. So like part of me is just very practical. Like I want things to be better, but like better ways are not necessarily guaranteed to be possible. So like just like I look for the constraints that are out there, and I'm like, what's the best possible world within the constraints that we have? And like also with just kind of the feeling that like things don't have to, like it doesn't have to be possible to be worth trying. So just openness to like the kind of the release valve for, like, I think utopian thinking can go wrong a lot, and for me the release valve is just like, maybe it's not possible, but just like do the best you can, try to figure out like how good you can make things. Don't try to force other people to do, like say, oh, if only you would do things the way I think they should be done, then everything will be better. That's just not in my character, and I don't necessarily know why. I don't know what switch flips, but it's just, I don't know. If you read enough history, it's just like it just always goes wrong. So it's like just like what can we do on a voluntary basis just ends up being the North Star for me. Because like in my well, also in my life, like voluntary interactions have kind of been the release valve for things like inequality, things like injustice. Like if you, like for me, like my parents choosing to like both first immigrate from Nigeria to America drastically improved my family's prospects and quality of life. And then within America, being able to make choices about like, what school are my kids going to go to? What neighborhood are we going to live into? Like individual choice is kind of what has produced prosperity and what I've actually seen in the world. So it's really just like, okay, well, if that's what's worked for me, how could I want to restrain other people's choices? How could I want to say you have to do things my way when like you also have eyeballs, like you've seen what happens in your own life, like you can probably make decisions enough for you. So that's just kind of like my constituency. I wish I could unpack where it all came from, but like it's just like I do think that it's possible to do much better than where we're at. I'm just very unwilling to restrict people's choices to get there. I do think in general, like finding ways to restrict your own choices is good. Having like a code, having restrictions on yourself, great. Having restrictions imposed by other people, it's just not my style.
I'm sure that we're hoping for an answer there so we can just like clone Nirans. And I know that Andy's like thinking about education with children, and we're really into those juntos, education juntos and or juntos and Kernel. And so that would have been nice. But I wonder if we could skip back just to this idea of a gameskeeper. And we've got a couple of minutes left now, and we're just going to take Q&A. So just let the chat know if you've got questions. Friends to put them in the chat. And so Paul, when you were talking about the gamekeeper scenario, said, I like the analogy to something like D&D, since D&D is an amazing example of how the games I personally like best knew how to bend the rules. If we're algorithm enforced, how do we bend the rules the right way?
That's a great question. So I think there is a lot of possibilities to do things that are algorithm enforced in crypto, things like the DeFi protocols that are out there, where the system is just going to execute what you said it should do when you send your transaction. But I think I think algorithmic thinking can be constraining to what the possibilities of crypto are. And that's why I talk so much about community life, where there are no algorithms. It's just people coming together to do the things they like. So I think to a very big extent, like the actions that people are taking that are crypto adjacent will involve no algorithms at all. Like there are kind of rules of the road for how you interact with other people. But to me, the best way to think about what crypto does for things beyond DeFi is to be kind of how disputes are resolved rather than how actions are taken on a regular basis. So like, for example, let's say that like your community and whoever you're working with agrees on a path forward, like there's no need for any algorithm to be involved to make that happen. You just do the thing, right? The edge case, when it's like, hey, there's this disagreement, and then it's like, okay, how do we move forward together? That's when this new technology actually comes in really handy. Because if you've already said, like, these are the rules for how we're going to resolve our disputes, and you can just go to the system, you can interact with those rules, and that will be enforced for you by the network. But it's really just when disputes happen. So there's a lot of crypto systems, especially DAO type systems, that don't present it as a dispute resolution, but end up actually using it as a dispute resolution system. For instance, like there's a lot of DAOs that just vote on every proposal on chain, and it seems like the smart contracts are what's constraining their actions. But really, like if everything's getting passed, well, all the smart contract is doing is handling like when there's a disagreement, when there's 50-50 sort of proposals that need to be handled. That's when the smart contracts, that's when the algorithms come into play. But most of the time, it's just people things. It's human interaction. It's like there's so much more non-technical work to be done in crypto than there really is even technical work. It's people with strong people skills are kind of the most important thing right now.
Okie doke. And so we also have, I'm not sure, maybe I can get a name from Vivek in the chat, but this is a devil's advocate question. And it was, is this just the crypto equivalent of tax policy and things like road infrastructure projects? So
yeah, maybe if Michael Williams
Yeah.
from Unstoppable, if you don't mind, maybe setting back some context, we'd love to get back to your question. If you mind unmuting.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good, good.
Let me get myself all set up here. Hello, that's the wrong camera. That's all right, I'll switch it. Yeah, my general question was around, if we're talking about ways to take, what's the right term, kind of the offshoot of things like land, turning into some kind of revenue, like the cast off value of these assets, and refocus that towards community improvements. That sounds a lot to me like taxes, and using those taxes for things like road infrastructure or just general other common goods that don't necessarily have a direct owner, kind of benefit everyone. So I'm just wondering, like, is this just a next iteration of that kind of policy, and the ability to have these systems, these ecosystems pay for common goods that are more closely tied to them? This is a very fuzzy question, so I'm not sure exactly what I'm asking. Maybe you can pull something out of that that's useful.
I like it. It's good. So for me, like, I focus my thinking time on what can be done on a voluntary basis. So to me, that's the biggest difference from like things like tax policy. Like, it's not about trying to change the laws about what we tax, although there are some circumstances where I think that would be a good idea. That's just not what I spend my time on. For me, it's like, what can we do on a voluntary basis? What can we do by organizing and doing things on our own in kind of a way that we want to do? So for a concrete example of what that looks like, I'm not trying to suggest that some government change their policy to say, hey, the value of this land goes into this crypto system now, and that we're going to do it that way. What I'm suggesting is that we get a whole bunch of communities together, organize them, and make sure they know that they have the ability, as they grow as a network, they have more and more negotiating power over time, and to show them that they can just ask for the value that they are entitled to in the first place. So for example, imagine that everybody in a city was part of some sort of community that was a beneficiary of some sort of funding system. Everybody in the city. So if they had some method for collective action, they could say, hey, you know, instead of all the people running these businesses just giving all this value to the landlords who own this piece of land, what if we said, hey, we're not going to shop at this place unless you take some of that value and just fund communities with it instead. They have the collective power to do that because the value of the land actually comes from them in the first place. There's no, it's not really a, like, you don't have to, there's no force required. It's like if you stop showing up to a place, the land isn't valuable anymore. You're the source of the value. So that's what I'm saying. It's much different from taxes in the sense that it's much more about organizing. It's much more about negotiation, and it's much more about helping people capture the value that they already the capture value that other people do not create. Anything that other people create, like if you're starting a business, you're doing work, you're building like houses, you're doing things like that's value that other people are creating, like that's theirs. But if you're capturing value from either like trying to get us all to look at the same thing at the same time, like scrolling on our news feed endlessly, I mean, we're creating that value. So I think it should go to our communities probably. Like I'm not gonna ask for a law for that, but if we can organize to get that, I think that's probably a good thing. The value, like a lot of what people are experimenting right now is play to earn in video games. Because again, if you're building some sort of massively multiplayer game, a lot of the value comes from the players that show up to play the game. So if you organize those players and they're part of some community that wants to benefit from the value that they create, you can say, hey, we're just not going to play this game if the value does not go to us. So like it's really any value that wasn't being created by the company, by the business, by the owner is in a sense up for grabs if you organize in the right way. So that to me is what's different from, it's not really a tax at all. It's just about saying, hey, fund our stuff because we create the value that you were trying to capture. And then they give part of the value because it's the cost of doing business, the same way that paying a landlord is the cost of doing business. I think funding a community could be the cost of doing business instead.
I just want to celebrate one thing that you said before we get to the next question, which is that you are already the value. It's such a simple and beautiful insight. It reminds me, for those of you who are interested in looking for Easter eggs in the Kernel Learn track, you will find a wonderful video by a man called Muji called Timeless Now, and he's speaking, he's a West Indian man who spent a lot of time in India, and some seekers came to him asking him, what's the deepest prayer you've ever heard? He turns and he says, it's just thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. They said, what are we thankful for? And he says, that's how far you've gone from the path. And it's just this realization, like, you know, that you are the value. It's so simple, and yet it's so difficult for people to believe because we've been so forgetful of it for so long, that of course you're the value in this very practical way. Like it's the people who play the MMORPG who bring the value to it. It's the people who gather on the land who make it you know, more desirable and therefore increase the property prices. It's not some mystical statement. It's that you are the value. It's the same thing as like, what do you mean you don't know what you're thankful for? Life is this incredible, vibrant opportunity, you know. There's an opportunity because we get to spend it with other people like Niran. So it's really beautiful what you said.
Amazing. I think 10 minutes left. We're going to go to GatherTown after just to hang out for whoever wants to be late, but we won't get there because we still have great Q&A for the last bit. Maybe, I think Angel had a question, and then Stephanie could be the two that we go to in order. If Angel, you're able to unmute.
Hi, it wasn't actually a question. It was just that I was really agreeing with what you were saying about how it shouldn't really be a forced rule, rather than coming to a point where we can together decide on things rather than it being an algorithm that makes it happen. And I was just applauding you for seeing that it should really be, in my opinion anyway, that the human interaction should come first in regards to solving things, and then the computer afterwards. But it was just me applauding you for that, because I find very few people can actually see that. You can't lose the human content in regards to the whole aspect of what we're doing. And I think that's what drives it. But just thanking you for that, Niran. And if you've got anything to elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Like, for me, a lot of my perspective on that just comes from time. Like, the technology itself is so exciting that it's very easy to get very attached to what's happening with the technology. So that's the way I started off too. It's like, okay, like, what's happening on chain, what's happening in this transaction, what's happening in this code, that's what matters. But the more time you spend with it, especially the more time you spend using it and actually seeing what's happening, if any of you are parts of DAOs, you've probably seen that most of what's happening isn't on chain. Like, a DAO is not its smart contracts, a DAO is its people. And that's so true for many of the systems that we're building together. And spending more time focusing on, like, as much time, money, and resources we spend on designing and writing code, we need to spend that probably more time, energy, and resources on, like, making sure we're good stewards of the people we're bringing together and making to that path.
And then maybe Stephanie, if you're willing.
Hi, thank you very much, Vivek. Hello, Niran. Thank you very much for all your lovely words and thought initiation. I just had a bit of a question. So the thing that I kind of think about when I think about this beautifully idealistic and, totally workable solution for this future is when we consider these people that hold these items of value, if we say land, for example. So if we have, something that we need to produce from this land, so say if we have a farm and we need this farm to produce, say, corn or something for the community. And then when that is produced and the community says, okay, well, we want actually for you to then say put 30% back into the community of the profits that you receive from this corn production. At what point or what would be the possibility of remedying a situation whereby an uninformed populace can go and almost define what they want from a primary producer without the kind of understanding and knowledge of, for example, a multi-year crop or a system that they have no background in. And it can almost become almost a strong hand of these people that hold items of value that aren't necessarily bad actors, but, just hopefully not creating like a situation where they're trapped within that hold of value, if that makes sense.
That makes tons of sense.
Sorry.
So you're very right that like it's very easy for people to ask for things that are impractical and lead to the same bad outcomes that bad policy can lead to, that is deadweight loss. So if you ask this farmer to give some unreasonable amount of value back to the community that they can't do, and if everybody's asking for the same thing, that farmer is going to stop farming. You'll just like literally lose the thing that you want. And that's bad. So that's why I think it's important to keep competition in mind. That's kind of like an organizing principle. You're not necessarily trying to set prices or set the amount that people have to give. You want people, the people who are the stewards of our shared inheritance, whoever's on that land, whoever is controlling that news feed, whoever is creating that video game, you really want them to compete with each other to give as much as they can. Because if you allow them to compete with each other to give, what they have available to give is that surplus that they are not actually, the work that they're not doing is what they have to give. Like if they have to put in resources to produce the outcome like that farmer does, and you're saying you're asking for more than I actually have, then that's not something that they would ever offer voluntarily. So basically just flipping the script and saying like, hey, we as a community are going to go patronize the businesses that are giving as much of that surplus that they get from controlling a scarce resource to the communities that are consuming it, and just having them compete for business, rather than saying, hey, we're putting out this mandate, you have to contribute X amount, and if you don't contribute that, then nobody's going to go to you. Like, I think that ends up being very similar to just laws and policies that can have the same bad outcomes as they could if a government were doing it.
Amazing.
Thank you very much. Definitely lots to think on.
Yeah. Amazing, amazing. One last question, I think, from Sister Tatwa, if you're willing, and I think we go to gather from there. Let Niran get on with his wonderful day. But Sister, please.
Greetings of love and light and peace and darkness, Kernel family. Give so much thanks, Niran, for all the works, and well, everyone, all of you, the works you're doing in our world. My particular question is, like, I think I understand how it works, like in the etheric world, and the toolkits in particular, you know, because a safe container or codes, you know, in my world are really important to create the ability for the alchemy to take place. I just wonder, how does it translate into the organic world? Like, you know, obviously we all live in one geographical location. It's much more difficult, as you say, to move in and move out of the communities. What do you do if someone like does, you know, is a bad actor in there? Like, you know, what are the, you know, I don't want to get into penalties, or, you know, like, have you seen it directly translate into an organic on the ground community?
So that's what we're trying to do more and more of. So right now, a lot of the communities that we work with are DAOs. They're very crypto heavy communities, and it's less about communities gathering like in the place that they live with the people they live with to do the thing that they like. I think one of the most important features of this style of organizing is that no community ends up being an island. No community can achieve, unless you're on but no community can achieve these outcomes on their own. It's really by the communities banding together that gives them the negotiating power to be able to do any of this. So if there's a community that's a bad actor, that's in some way behaving poorly, like there are these other peer communities that have the ability to respond to that if they want. Like, it's all based on voluntary interaction, and there's some communities that are not going to want to work with communities that, for instance, if they're in some way abusing their community members, maybe these other communities don't want to work with you anymore, and you don't have that ability to cooperate. So there's like, as we anytime we're trying to come up with new ways to cooperate with one another, I do think it's very important to have like those checks and balances in place, and it's just trying to find out where, like, who should be that check. And I think in this case, it's really the peer communities. There's a lot of like potential edge cases that can go bad there too. So like there's there's nothing perfect about this model that solves all the problems. But I think the general principle there is, like, if something is going wrong in one community, the people who check that community are the other communities.
Can I ask, you're establishing communities as we speak, so would it be possible for what comes out of the Kernel adventures that we're on in establishing this community, that we feed into also the peer-to-peer with the communities that you're creating in this world?
Absolutely. That's exactly what we want. In fact, for me, like, I do less creating of communities and more connecting communities that are either forming or already existing. So that's exactly what we do. If you're creating a community that could benefit from plugging into a network of other communities and sharing resources, that's what we're all about, and we want to work with you.
Can I find you on the Slack group then?
Yes.
I am on the Slack group.
Yeah.
Perfect.
No better way to end, sister. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Peace and love.
Thank you. Thank you. Amazing. Andy, Alicia, any last words from your side before we wrap?
No, I feel like if we went into like a 10-day Vipassana retreat, that Niran, like these thoughts would be all we would need to sit in silence for a long time. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks to the wonderful sister, you've just been called to pray. Remembrance of.
You heard it. You heard the divine masculine in the background. Yeah.
Remembrance of purpose, without it being dogmatic, but just truly, Niran, thank you so very, very much. It's been a deep honor and a privilege to spend an hour and a half with you exploring some of these stories, which can lead to sharing better truths. And as you know, we're in it for the long haul. Once you hooked Vivek in Portugal, I'm afraid that was it. So we really look forward to many years of shared exploration in this wonderful, challenging, but ultimately worthwhile world with you.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks again for the opportunity, and thanks for stewarding the special theme that is Kernel. Like for everybody who's here, if you're part of this thing, you're early. Like this is still very early in everything that's going on. And B, like what you do matters. Like the story isn't going to be written by me. It's not going to be written by just Vitalik. He's written a very large chapter, but like it's really written by everybody who participates. Like there's so much that's going to play out from this new technology, this new opportunity to shape how we cooperate in this world. My ideas may not actually be the right ones. It might be something that you come up with. But like the most important thing is you've already taken the best first step by being part of Kernel. The best next step is to be part of something. Like, never not be part of some community that's trying to figure out what to do with this new technology. Because if you participate, you shape where this goes and you make sure that it goes in a direction that is pro-social from your perspective, just mine, not just somebody else's.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Niran. Thank you everyone for sticking around. The GatherTown link is there for people who want to hang out, debrief, decompress for a little bit. If you have to go, thank you so much for being with us. And thanks again. Thanks again to Niran. We'll be back next week. And office hours, the first one is Friday. So if you have projects that you want to explore deeply with mentors, they're really excited to meet you tomorrow. See you soon.
Vivek, quick question. Do we talk to you about mentors before the office hours tomorrow or during office hours?
During will be perfect. During
Amazing.
will be perfect.
Thank you.
Peace, 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 peace.
Bye.
Bye, Ben. Bye,
Thank you all.
Juliet.
Later.
Bye.
Skaters.
Bye,
Bye.
friends.
Bye, Kevin.
Yes.
Good to
Yay.
see you.
Bye.
Can't believe we do this.
Salama.
Bye.
I can't believe we do this. LOL. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. So funny. LOL. Alicia and Andy, you too. Just diamonds. Thank you.
That was
And
the questions at the end. I really like that. I really like opening it up and letting people kind of speak in their own voice. I feel like it's so impactful.
yeah. Plus one. Plus one. More of that. More of that. Thank you, everyone who's still here. Lonnie, thanks for your energy in the chat. Rumi, good to see you.
I love how it's like, thank you guys. Thank you. No, get the fuck out. Come on. Get out.
No.
I'm just being funny, man. I'm just being funny. It's like, oh, it's so nice. Guys, it's been great. Please, like.
Skedaddle. It's funny.
It's so lovely to see you. Just get, hey, the door's right there. It's a great door. It's a lovely door.
It
has a
big red
lovely
button.
mat.
Big red button. No.
Right,
It's just a portal to the next world. GatherTown. We'll see you there. Bye. Bye.